colleagues. I'm happy to see more and more of our colleagues are gathering into this hall. And so it is the last event, the last public talk of our today's program of LMF 2025 program. So we were talking a lot about democracy, its challenges, but now it's time to think deeper about what could we do with it. Enlightenment philosophers whose faith in legal democratic government inspired the American French Revolution stood firmly against obscurantism, darkness, confusion, unreason. Today, the prophets of new obscurantism offer exactly that: magical fixes, superstition, and manufactured fear, and rising elite is shaping a society where superstition eclipses reason, transparency vanishes, and the misdeeds of political leaders hide behind clouds of nonsense. How do we push back against the new obscurantism modern autocracies cultivate, and what choices and action does it demand of each of us? Please, I ask you to welcome our distinguished keynote speakers, Anne Applebaum, who is a staff writer at the Atlantic and a senior fellow at the SNF Agora Institute at Johns Hopkins University. She's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, historian, commentator on international affairs with a particular focus on Eastern Europe and authoritarianism. And please welcome Volodymyr Yermolenko, who is a Ukrainian philosopher, journalist, writer, who leads Pan-Ukraine as a president. Please welcome. The stage is yours.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure and it's a big honor. So please welcome again Anne Applebaum.
Thank you.
So we had a recently conversation about your book about autocracy, but I know that you also want to ask our Ukrainian audience something. Yeah, please.
So this is my own research, okay? How many people in this audience think that there will be a ceasefire as a result of the talks in Istanbul? Raise your hands. That's what I expected, but you've confirmed my expectation. Thank you.
I think your next article will start with something like big laughter in Lviv room. Because Ukrainians really don't take it seriously. We'll come back to these questions as well, but first let me come back a little bit to our conversation around your book, Autocracy Inc. or Autocracy Incorporated. And the question that I asked on that podcast, that Ukraine World podcast, and I'm asking again, why do you think that current autocracies are different from the more typical tyrannies that we are accustomed to, or the totalitarianism of the 20th century?
So yes, my book, Autocracy Inc., does describe a network of dictatorships who don't have a common ideology, and this maybe makes them different from the Soviet bloc. So we're talking about communist China, nationalist Russia, theocratic Iran, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, a really wide range of countries with different interests. What holds them together is not, as I said, a common set of ideas or a common vision, but rather a set of interests. And some of them are financial interests. So the leaders of most of these countries are not just wealthy people, they are billionaires. In some cases, we don't know why they're billionaires or how they're billionaires or where is their money. We know that Putin is very wealthy. We don't know exactly how. And this opacity, this darkness and secrecy that surrounds them is part of what makes them dictators and part of what keeps them in power. But they have, compared to the dictators of the 20th century, they are simply richer. They have more ways of stealing money, they have more ways of hiding money, And they also have ways of using that money to build their power and spread influence, not only in their own countries, but in ours, I mean, in the democratic world also. They also work together to build common narratives, but these are not, again, they're not exactly strictly ideological narratives, and they're more of an argument about dictatorship being stable and safe, and an attack on democracy as weak and divided and degenerate. Sometimes they even mean sexually degenerate. And this is this is different from China to Iran to Venezuela, but you get common echoes, and you see them imitating one another and copying one another across languages and across media. I mean, in my book, I trace some of these narratives and find them. For example, the story about the biolabs in Ukraine. Do you remember this from the beginning of the war?
Of course, of course.
Right, so the biolabs appeared.
We are all products of these biolabs.
We know about the biolabs. So the biolab story appeared obviously in Russian, but it also appeared in Spanish. It appeared in Iran. I found it in all kinds of media. I found it on the U.S. internet. I found it in all kinds of places. So they copy one another. And finally, they have, again, different interests and different, different things they care more about. They are also pretty united in their common desire to push back against the language of democracy and the language of rule of law. Rule of law, democracy, transparency, accountability, independent courts. These are things that bother all of them. Rights also, human rights, women's rights. These are things that bother all of them because this is the language of their own internal opposition. They hear it around the world, and they feel they need to push back against it around the world. So whether it's the Hong Kong democracy movement or the Iranian women's rights movement, or indeed the Navalny movement in Russia, which was an anti-corruption movement, a transparency movement, they've identified these things as a threat to them, and they fight them everywhere, at home, abroad, in America, in Ukraine, in Europe. And these, I think, are the things that make them a little bit different from some of the dictatorships of the past.
But one thing that is very interesting is how these new autocratic political systems are based upon a certain idea of corporation. And I think this is also something that you're trying to say. And we also see it in America right now. I mean, Trump considers America as a big corporation. He wants to run it as a corporation. We see among the ideologues of Trumpism, people like Curtis Yarvin, who is saying that we need monarchy in America because it should be run by a central executive officer.
Yeah, he actually says America needs a CEO.
CEO,
so not a president.
And I'm very worried about this because we were talking several decades before about the role of transnational corporations, etc. But now the difference of a polity, of a state from a corporation is that you have the system of rights. You have a system of rights, you have the judiciary, you have some justice system, etc., which the idea of corporation does not presume.
Also, the point of a corporation is different. So the point of a corporation is to make money for its shareholders. That's the purpose of it. The purpose of a country is to make everybody prosperous. And also, as you say, to give everybody rights and to give everybody some role in the state. And if that's no longer if the purpose of America is to enrich Donald Trump and his family, then it becomes a very different kind of country. I don't really maybe have to explain this to Ukrainians. I mean, you had experience of a president who tried to convert your country into a money-making opportunity for himself and his children and his friends, and that brings down, it impoverishes ordinary people, it deprives them of rights and freedom. Ultimately, it makes the country weaker. I mean, it simply will over time. And in the case of the United States, it is also it is catastrophically illegal. I mean, it goes against every single tenet of our Constitution and every single aspect of our legal system. And anyway, sorry.
Yeah, and to continue this thought, I would make a bridge with Hannah Arendt, a great anti-totalitarian thinker. And remember, One of her points is what is the difference of totalitarianism with classical tyrannies, like Montesquieu described tyrannies or despotism as what is the difference between monarch and a despot? Monarch rules by himself, but he follows the law, while despot doesn't follow the law. What Hannah Arendt says, well, look, totalitarianism tells you that there is an upper law, that there is a law of history, law of biology, to which we all kind of subject ourselves. What about current autocrats? My feeling is that they want to turn lawlessness into law. That's what Putin is trying to do, to increase risks for others by breaking the law. Therefore, such figures as Carl Schmitt are so popular now in America, in Russia, in China, everywhere. Because Carl Schmitt, who knows it's a Nazi philosopher or the German philosopher who was one of the important philosophers of Nazism, his idea that there is a sovereign, like a god, who breaks the law and who acts during the times of exception. Do you feel that willingness to say it's Trump, Putin, and some others saying, I am the exception, therefore I will not follow the law?
So I doubt very much that Trump has read Carl Schmitt, just to say to start with. But he does. He
intuitively understands.
It is an intuitive idea that, I mean, it's actually older than Carl Schmitt. You know, l'état c'est moi. You know, I am the law. I've heard both him and some people around him recently saying, I was elected, therefore I represent the will of the people, therefore what I say is the law. And he has around him right now, I think uniquely in American history, I don't think this has ever happened before, he has people who have been attracted to him over the last 4 years. They weren't around him before. But once he attacked the political system, once he carried out an insurrection against the Democratic election of 2020, he began to draw towards him people who think like this. And they also would like to encourage the idea that the law is what we say it is, not that the law is written in a constitution or that it's decided by courts. And right now what you're watching, and this is still playing itself through, where it's still very, very early, what you're watching is Trump challenging the legal system in different ways. So he's broken multiple laws actually. He has defied several lower court orders. He hasn't yet, I mean, there's one sort of still ambiguous case. He hasn't yet said, I won't obey the Supreme Court. In fact, on the contrary, he said he would obey the Supreme Court, although we'll see. But what's happening now is you're watching a lot of cases go through the legal system and people are waiting for the result. So he broke the law, a lawsuit was filed, and now we are waiting to see what will happen. And that's one of the reasons I know that people here and elsewhere in Europe they think there's nothing happening and Democrats aren't doing anything. And so actually there is a lot happening. A lot of it is legal right now because this is how our system works. You know, you're meant to be held account by the court system.
So it's interesting when Putin invaded Ukraine. One of the messages of Ukrainians was that, look, this is not only a war against Ukraine. It's a war against international law. It's the war against the idea of the law. Do you have a feeling that what Trump shares with Putin is that he's fighting the law, the idea of law?
So this I agree with completely. So one of the purposes of the 2022 full-scale invasion was to demonstrate that we Russians, we don't care about the law. We don't care about laws on war. We don't care about laws on conventions on genocide. We don't care about laws protecting rights or protecting children. We can do what we want, and we're going to prove that this law doesn't matter. And from the beginning, part of his goal has been to show that the international system doesn't work and it cannot hold him to account. Again, I doubt very much that Trump has thought through his actions in the same way. But certainly there are people around him who have and who also understand that what he is doing is a kind of demonstration that I'm going to show you that the law doesn't work. And now, in the next 6 months, we will find out whether the law works or not.
Look, my metaphor for this, with which I try to explain this to outside audience, is that, look, after the Second World War, international system has invented rules to limit violence. and therefore you have this international law, international humanitarian law, etc. Well, Putin is trying to do is to use violence to limit rules.
Yes.
Yes, to destroy rules. Another thing which is, I think, in common right now between Trump and Putin is use of virtuality. And I'm interested in what you think about this, because I think in Ukraine we have a very strong feeling of reality right now. And basically it's a reality of life and death. You cannot pretend you're playing the game when people die, right? It's no longer a computer game. But what Russian political, philosophical tradition was very rich upon the idea of, like, I have a great fantasy, and reality doesn't correspond with this fantasy. It's bad for reality. I will change the reality according to this fantasy. Bolshevism was one of the key examples. How you build a proletarian country in a proletarian state in a country where there is no proletariat, right? And what happened with Trump, I think it's more or less the same. It's the idea that I have a fantasy, it doesn't correspond to the reality. All the educated people say it doesn't correspond to reality, it's false, it's fake. And he says, I will still make this fantasy stronger than reality itself. It's a kind of a surrealist politics. It's kind of a virtuality which wins over reality. What do you think?
No, I absolutely agree that that's what is happening again. In the case of Trump, it's interesting where it comes from. In his case, I don't think it was originally a political calculation. It came from his experience of New York tabloids and kind of celebrity culture over the last 30 years. And that he learned through experience that he could create a completely false picture of himself, and that this false picture could be useful to him in various ways. I mean, for example, the idea that he's a great deal maker. A book called Art of the Deal, which was ghostwritten by somebody who's now very sorry about it. It's actually is written several times. I apologize, But actually, he was a bad businessman. He inherited money from his father. He lost more money than he made. He was rescued a couple of times fortuitously, probably in one case by Russian money. So he actually isn't a good businessman. But he learned that if you create the picture of yourself as a good businessman, if you do, as he had a television program about yourself, reality TV show about yourself as a businessman, that this was actually, you could make money that way. And you could change reality. So his experience is that this works, and there is something about contemporary culture, American culture, but also true elsewhere, where people have allowed the fiction of TV or the fiction of social media to be stronger than reality. And I have to say, I mean, this is what struck me during his election campaign, during the last year's election, was I no longer am able to say whether for most people, whether real reality or online reality is more powerful. I mean, online reality, many people spend more time with it. They are more absorbed in it. They hear it echoed and repeated from different sides. Maybe it's stronger than reality, especially because a lot of what we mean by reality, I don't know, the reality is that Joe Biden built a lot of infrastructure in America, okay? So there is this infrastructure. You can read about it somewhere. You can, maybe if you live in a state where there's a new bridge built or someone's building a new highway, you can see the infrastructure. But for a lot of people, this infrastructure remains somehow theoretical. I mean, it's real. It exists in the real world. But the way you now absorb it is, again, through social media and TV. And somehow this, if your social media says this infrastructure doesn't exist, then that's more powerful to you than the actual bridge that is in the next door state. So we are in a complicated moment when people do believe things online in a deeper way than they believe them in real life. I mean, there's another aspect to this too, and this is maybe, in the case of Putin, I think this is deliberate. There's another thing that Trump does, aside from creating alternate reality, he also often repeats lies or repeats things that are not true or exaggerated, over and over and over again, even when they can be misproven. So recently he started talking about the price of petrol, of gasoline. Like, anybody who has a car knows what is the price of petrol, and they know what groceries cost. And so you now have Trump saying things that people know aren't true. And so the question is, why is he doing that? And that has, I think, another purpose. And this is something that Putin learned, which is that also if you repeatedly say things that compete with reality, then eventually you create a situation where people say, my God, everybody's lying on television. You know, I don't know which politician is right and wrong. All politics is bad. All the public sphere is polluted. And I'm just going to stay home because politics is awful and nobody knows what's true and what's not. And there is even a way, I mean, this has already showed up in polling where, for example, some of the very corrupt things Trump has done, you know, in a way, the corruption has polluted the political sphere, and people say, oh, well, all politicians are corrupt. He's lying, and so all politicians lie all the time. And people stop making these even differences between them. And this, of course, this really is the road to autocracy, because once people say, everyone's lying, they're all false, there's no truth, then why would you participate in politics at all? You would just stay home. Why vote? You know, why join a political party? Why be a candidate? You know, it's all fake. So it's a way of creating apathy and creating nihilism and creating cynicism. And I think this he has done. I mean, I wouldn't say it's worked for everybody, but it works pretty well. And of course, this has been Putin's project for 20 years.
And this is precisely what, again, coming back to Hannah Arendt, how she describes a sound society is with this idea of bios politikos, which she translates into Latin as vita activa, so active life as active citizens. So if today's despots develop certain pacifism, not pacifism, but passivism, being a feeling of being passive and feeling of not really influencing everything around you, that creates these new autocracies. And then there are two questions that arise. First, how they play with individuals, because the classical totalitarianism is saying individual does not exist. You don't have a right to your private life. While today's autocracies are saying you do have a right to your private life. We know your private life because we micro-target you. You actually express yourself in consumerism. You want this music, go buy it. You want this kind of a fashion, go buy it, etc. But then stay away from politics. And that's what you're saying in your book. But another feeling, which I feel basically even not in autocracies, but in democracies in Europe or in America, is that this feeling of helplessness. And I say sometimes to Europeans, like, you are Václav Havel upside down. You are not the power of the powerless, but powerlessness of the powerful. You know, you are powerful, but you have the feeling that you cannot change anything about Russian invasion of Ukraine, and other things. So, what do you think about this kind of feeling of being? I'm not having influence on anything, so I will stay away from all this.
No, I mean, there is a deliberate policy designed to make people feel that way. I mean, there's a slight nuance in Europe, which is different from America, which is that Europeans genuinely have a problem in that their institutions don't fit the moment. So Europe is genuinely European Union as a whole, and especially if you add the UK, is the richest and most powerful economy in the world. And it could easily have the richest and most powerful army in the world. But it isn't structured to do that. It wasn't built for that purpose. It was built for this era when there would be no more wars.
Because the last war was Second World War, and there will be no wars in the future.
There will be no more wars, right. And although some countries have militaries, it's not that there's nothing. There isn't a way of... there was a way of making it into a single, more powerful thing, and that was NATO. But now that we have a U.S. president who is less committed to NATO, let's just leave it like that, and who is willing to undermine and attack allies, which he has done repeatedly since becoming president, actually for the last 6-8 years. It's almost, you've destroyed the central organizing principle of NATO. And it isn't clear how you recast it or rebuild it. And And that's not just a philosophical problem. That's also an institutional problem, and it doesn't have an immediate or obvious solution. And there are plenty of Europeans now. People keep saying, someone said it to me today, oh, Europeans live in a dream world, they don't understand what's happening. No, a lot of Europeans understand. They understand well. They understand Russia's a threat. They understand the war in Ukraine is dangerous. They understand that Russia threatens them in the cyber world, in sabotage, in many other ways. They understand that the U.S. is now led by somebody who is, at the very least, unenthusiastic about them. They all understand it. It's just that there isn't a clear path to, it's not like there's a single leader or a single institution or a European army that can be, so this is a deeper kind of problem, because the world that Europe created for itself after 1945 didn't imagine existing apart from and away from the United States.
And it's a world of agora, the internal conversation, which doesn't presuppose the agon, the idea of defense and, and fight for its survival. But now that world is gone, and increasingly Europeans are shocked with this.
No, they know it's gone. Yeah. They're not shocked. But I'm talking about the leaders, Poland, Germany, France, UK, Scandinavia, Baltic states. They know it. There's no illusion. I think even Italy and Spain, although they're farther away and it matters, everybody understands it. It's just that they don't have yet a clear, obvious alternative. There isn't a person or an institution who is the obvious leader to move them forward.
And let's talk about this, because now we pass from broad philosophical questions, which interest us also very much because it's where the world is going, but to very existential questions. So Trump and Putin. Trump wants a deal. Putin doesn't want a deal. Putin wants destruction, victory over Ukraine. Does Trump have an illusion that Putin still wants a deal? Does he want to meet him, or what is going on? What is your feeling of the coming month? Because for me, presence of Xi Jinping on the parade in Moscow was a clear sign that the Kissinger in reverse, they want to do a Kissinger in reverse. They want to take Russia away from China, like Kissinger did China away from Soviet Union. It's not possible. China and Russia are very close.
It was never possible.
Yeah, it was never possible. Will Trump understand it at some point?
So I am not able to explain the brain of Donald Trump. So stipulate. So I am not,
Do you think we should ask neurophysiologists?
No, all I can do, I can just tell you what he says, okay? And actually, what he says, I think, is what he thinks. Maybe it changes from sometimes hour to hour, but this is what he says when he said, what he seems to be. He even said it again. I just saw a clip. It was either today or last night. He says, the war only happened because of Joe Biden. If Joe Biden had not been there, then Russia would not have invaded Ukraine. So his understanding was, once he became president, Putin likes him, and so Putin would stop the war. And it would be enough for him to kind of put some pressure on Ukraine, say some nice things about Russia, send Steve Witkoff to Moscow to show we're friendly again, and that this would end the war. And I actually think this is what he believed. And remember, he doesn't know any Russian history. He doesn't know any Ukrainian history. He doesn't know, not just deep history. He doesn't know the history of the last 10 years. And so he he thinks of the world as a kind of contest between powerful people. There's no deeper forces or longer story. And he doesn't know this backstory, so he doesn't think it exists. So as far as he's concerned, Putin invaded Ukraine to show that Biden was weak, and now that Biden is gone, he will leave. And we're now in the process of Trump learning that this is not true. And I don't know what will happen next. He's still, there is now a bill in the Senate with bipartisan, including Republican support. It's actually a Republican bill that would put enormous new pressure on Russia, including secondary sanctions. This would be sanctions on countries who buy oil and gas from Russia, which would be really a big change. And so he now has that available to him if he wants to do it. But I don't know whether he'll understand that this is what he needs to do. He's been so far absolutely reluctant and refused to put any pressure on Russia at all. Sometimes he writes things on social media, Vladimir, stop it, or but again, he is someone who.
And Putin says, "Oh my God,
no, but
I shouldn't have started it. It's all Biden."
But he lives in this world of performance. Everyone is performing, and so he must assume that Putin is also performing, and he can just end the performance. And again, that there is a deeper goal, that Putin wants to destroy all of Ukraine. He's just maybe learning this now. And so we'll see.
But he's learning. So I realize that we talk about him like as a child, like we are babysitting him, right?
Actually, it's important. He's not a child. Actually, what he is someone who lives in the present. And everyone in this room, I think, you're journalists, you're people who are engaged, so you live in a longer time horizon. Your memory of this war goes back 10 years, 15 years, maybe even 300 years, right? So you understand it in that long trajectory. And Trump understands it in this moment and his relationship to Putin right now. And he doesn't have the backwards trajectory, and he also doesn't really have a future strategy. He doesn't think, and this was also a misunderstanding, that if we just have a ceasefire, then the war is over. That's also what he thinks. Because the idea that there would be a day after, and then maybe Russia would invade again in 5 years, and that's why Ukraine needs security guarantees. He doesn't think like that either. He's not thinking 10 years from now what will happen. He's not thinking how we have peace, forever. He's thinking, how do I win this moment? How do I stop the war so that I can say I stopped the war? And almost everything he does, once you understand that what he's doing is about winning each situation, like, the day he announced his tariffs and the stock markets crashed, this was a big win. He made a huge impact, okay? And then a few days later, it turned out this is a disaster, and he changed his policy, and then he said, now I'm going to win by doing tariff deals with every country in the world. And now he does a scene where he has a tariff piece of paper that he signs with the British, and when you look closer, the piece of paper means nothing, and nothing has really changed, but he has a ceremony, and he signs the deal, and this is a win. And this is how he thinks. This is a performance, and what matters is winning the moment. Not what happened before and not what will happen after. And that's almost, I find that trying to explain this to rational people who are used to thinking about, world politics or economics in a sophisticated way, it is almost impossible to get them to understand this. People, instead, what they want, they keep saying, oh, there's a deeper game. He has a secret plan. He wanted to make the market crash so that, but no, he's not. He's always living in the moment, and he wants to win whatever moment it is, whichever interview, whichever TV appearance. That's it.
That's a very social media mind, right? So you post something, you get 1 million likes, and you forget about it later. But what worries me is that, okay, he's doing lots of stupid things, but still people are talking about Ukraine, right? We got calls from foreign journalists and asking these questions, what will happen in Istanbul? And this, amuses us because we basically know the answer, and they know the answer, but they pretend they don't know the answer, therefore they're asking us. But what happens if Trump withdraws from this and say, okay, I cannot solve it, I couldn't solve it, I don't care about Nobel Peace Prize, and I will, as he is a person who doesn't care about reality, he will invent something else, some other virtuality. Like, we are sending rockets to Mars, okay, and everybody's following that. Will be that a danger? Because for us, there is a danger that the war will be again forgotten.
So it depends. And it depends what he means by walk away. So if by walk away he means that U.S. will go on sharing intelligence with Ukraine, this is the one thing the Europeans can't replace, and the U.S. will give or sell defense weapons, to anti-missile defense to Ukraine, which is the one thing also that Europe has, nobody has except the United States, then actually, if Trump walks away, I think it's fine. I mean, the war, you know, you will have the support of Europeans. You will continue to, you know, you've held the front line. Actually, somebody told me yesterday that the Russians haven't moved forward since February. You have the world's most sophisticated drone defense. It's getting better all the time. And you will continue to hold out until the moment when the Russians finally realize that they won't win and they can't pay the price anymore of thousands of people dying every week, and then the war will begin to be over. So I'm not sure it has to be a crisis.
Coming to Europe, what trends do you see in Europe? Because it's increasingly evident that European Union is not the only actor, because we see countries like UK and Norway playing an increasingly important role. Another trend is that we clearly see the divide between North and South. South is mostly indifferent, North is very active in supporting Ukraine. Another trend is we have troubles in Central Europe. I would even call it the comedy of Central Europe, to paraphrase the famous essay by Milan Kundera. And basically we have a complete reverse situation, because Kundera, as we remember, called Central Europe a kidnapped West, like a bloc which basically was occupied by Soviet Union, but actually was in values with the West. Now it's increasingly a kidnapped East. It's part of the West, like Hungary, Slovakia. We have troubles in Czech Republic, probably. We don't know what will happen with the Romanian election. So how do you see these dynamics and how Ukraine should build its partnership? Should it only focus on coalition of the willing, like Nordic countries?
I mean, I'm really hesitant to give Ukraine diplomatic advice. So clearly there is a coalition of countries who will actively help Ukraine and who understand the war also as a threat to their own security. And of course, those are your closest allies. And that is Scandinavia, the Baltic states, you know, Germany, France, UK, Poland, for the moment. You know, also, you know, but it's also important to understand that inside all the other countries, and in those as well, politics are also dynamic. I mean, maybe Hungary, I don't know, Hungarian politics is also becoming more volatile, but you know, certainly in Romania, certainly in Slovakia, certainly in the Czech Republic, I mean, you could, you know, you could have a moment where people who are less friendly to you rise, but then you could have also a moment where they lose. I mean, I'm not sure I would ever talk about any country as lost or we're not friends with them anymore. I mean, there is always someone to talk to. There are plenty of people in the Czech Republic and in Slovakia, and indeed in Hungary, who understand very well what a threat Russia poses to them as well as to you, and you should keep talking to them. And you will have some relationship with the government, whoever it is. So I wouldn't, you know, when Kundera wrote that, it was at a moment when it felt like communism was forever. You know, there was this bloc and there was a Berlin Wall and, you know, one side is captured. But what we're talking about now is something more that's in the flux of politics, and we'll see.
I remember in 2022, many of us, including myself, were describing the Russian invasion of Ukraine as kind of the last attempt of the empire. While Europe was constructed by empires, now it has de-imperialized itself in the 20th century. And like Russia is the only European empire that left. And it tries to, you know, take the last probably attempt to re-imperialize itself. Now we see the trend that re-imperialization is going all over the world. We see neo-imperialist China, we see Russia, we see neo-imperialist America. We see that becoming popular. And instead of westernization of Russia, we probably have the Russification, at least of the United States. Probably Trump will not have become president unless if Putin was stopped much earlier. What do you think about this?
Well, this is one of the arguments in my book, actually, was that we had this idea in the 1990s that if you create an open market for ideas and for goods, that what will happen is that democracy will spread and open markets and open society, rather, will spread from so-called from west to east. And we forgot that, the open society, the globalization goes both ways, and that also autocratic ideas and autocratic practices would spread from the so-called East to so-called West. And that was a fundamental misunderstanding, and that's one of the things that's characterized the last 10 or 15 years. And the form that it often took was the form of this secret money, the shell companies, tax havens, money laundering, all of those practices, which actually were invented in the West by Western banks and were a very small kind of fringe part of the Western financial system 20, 30 years ago, were taken up enthusiastically by, especially in the post-Soviet world, although not only. And then that money was used to create pockets of influence and friends in the U.S. I mean, this is where Donald Trump's money comes from, partly. People spend a lot of time worrying about whether he was in the KGB or whether they have compromat on him. I really don't think you need to look at any of that. He ran his business model in the 2000s was he built these luxury apartment buildings, and people bought apartments in them, or condominiums. And according to official records, I mean, this is in my book, between a fifth and a quarter of all the apartments that were bought in his buildings were bought by shell companies, meaning that we don't know who they were. They were anonymous. And this was at a time when most of this traffic in shell companies was coming from the former Soviet Union. So this was a lot of money that was flowing into his business through these secret channels, I should say entirely legally. This was legal. From the post-Soviet world and probably from Russia. And at one point, there's this famous quote one of his sons said in public, "Lots of our money is coming now from Russia," and this is what he meant. And so this flow of money from Russia, from, elsewhere, and probably from Ukraine also. There was Ukraine was also part of this corrupt post-Soviet system for a long time. A lot of this money ends up in America or in Europe, where it also enriches people and it increases also this tendency towards autocracy, this cynicism, and so on. So you could almost say that the current model of Autocracy Inc. was jointly created by this piece of the Western world and I keep saying East and West, but actually we're talking about the democratic world and the autocratic world, and some are more East and some are more West, and where's Greece? I don't know. Yeah.
It also means that the whole idea of like the classical liberalism that, for example, capitalism naturally leads to democracy, capitalism naturally leads to some kind of equality is also false. And
this wasn't classical liberalism. This was a more recent theory. This is in the last 30 years. There was an idea that the argument was that when people are wealthy enough, when you have a middle class, the middle class will demand rights. And this, I think, is probably true. And you even had a version of it in China, you had it in Russia, and so on. But it didn't, the theory didn't say what happens when the regime is so rich and so powerful that it is able to indefinitely push back against those demands for rights. And you have a moment, I mean, you can actually identify it. It's 2013 in China, and it's 2014 in Russia, when the autocracies identify and understand that this, as I said at the beginning, this language of rights is threatening to them, and they go out of their way to make sure that this middle class doesn't. So this is where the theory.
What I wanted to say is that nothing leads naturally to democracy and rights, right? So for us, the big lesson of the Soviet Union that we understand that, okay, socialism doesn't bring democracy naturally, and therefore people start believing that capitalism brings democracy naturally. And I think it's also a trap, because nothing is like what Tim Snyder is saying in his book on freedom, that freedom does not lie anywhere. It doesn't lie in socialism, doesn't lie in capitalism. It demands struggle, it demands fight. Nothing comes naturally. My last question probably, we are in Ukraine. What leads you to come back here? What inspires you here? What gives you lessons, energy here?
So this is maybe my 8th or 9th trip to Ukraine since February 2022. I'm inspired by the resilience of Ukrainians. I'm inspired by the creativity of Ukrainians. I feel lucky enough to know both people in the volunteer world here who have, created institutions that have lasted, that have worked, that continue to serve people despite the stress of war and the need to raise money, and have managed to keep going. I'm also inspired by, I'm lucky to know also people in the world of defense technology who have been dedicated to making sure that Ukraine is on the cutting edge of every new idea and the creation of, I'm not going to tell this audience because the creation not just of drones, but of bespoke software, of teams of people who know how to use them. I've been in basements in Kiev where you can see the whole front line on screens, outside of Kiev, sorry. There's really almost no country in the world right now which is, as a society, puts so much energy both into self-defense and self-care, into taking care of veterans. You have these extraordinary, here in Lviv, you have these extraordinary veteran rehabilitation centers. I was at one of them. I was at Superhumans yesterday, but I saw the mayor today who was talking about the other bigger one, the Unbroken. This is all, these are symptoms of a really healthy society. Maybe it doesn't feel like that if you actually live here. I live in Poland part of the time, and Poland is now, by historical standards, very rich. Like, they've never been this rich. Their stock market is going up. And you tell Poles, you're really rich now, and they look at you and they, no, And I'm sure it feels the same way to Ukrainians, but there is really a unique spirit and energy here, and I feel inspired by it every time I'm here.
We feel that we can give a couple of lessons to other parts of the world, yeah. So, questions? Microphone, where's the microphone? Here's the question. Oh, okay. Oh.
Thank you. Jonathan from podcast Silicon Curtain. One of the struggles here, and with lots of journalists here who focus on good quality information, an argument I have with a lot of friends who are Republicans in the US who think it's possible to change the mind of the Trump regime and those around him. They think the problem is of bad information, not bad intent. And if only they could inject good information into that sphere. I take a slightly different point of view, but tactically, I think it's kind of interesting to treat it as a bad information problem. But what's your take?
Sorry, bad information to whom? You mean Trump has bad information?
Trump and his circle. If it's a question of bad information...
I like the word inject that you actually use.
If it's bad intent, you can't really make any progress with good information.
So there are different questions about different people. So there are people around Trump who have a lot of information and understand everything very well. So that's not the problem. I mean, with Trump himself, again, I'm often asked to analyze how he thinks, and I really, I don't know him, I've never met him. All I can do is tell you what I see. And it looks to me, in the case of him, first of all, he is influenced by whatever information someone just gave him. That's true. But he is also very influenced by some very deep instincts and things that he's just always believed, and which you can't undo it. I mean, on tariffs, he was told over and over and over again that tariffs are economically damaging. All kinds of people made presentations, and he just didn't believe it. He's always believed in tariffs. He likes tariffs. That's it. And I have a bad feeling that it's the same with Putin. He thinks Putin is a good guy who likes him. He thinks that, he even once said in public, we went through this terrible experience in 2016 and 2017 together, meaning that Trump was accused of taking, the Russians were accused of intervening in the American election, which of course they did, and was shown multiple times by the Senate and others. And Trump feels that this was an attack on him and Putin together, and Putin also must suffer from bad sadness from this attack. And so therefore he feels some kind of solidarity with Putin. And that seems to be a very deep feeling that no one is able to dislodge. And he has had lots of people explain to him, I think, and I don't know what to do about that. I mean, you can probably influence Marco Rubio. You can probably influence, you could have, Mike Waltz understood Russia very well. There are plenty of people in the Senate who understand Russia very well. There are probably other people in Trump's immediate entourage. But whether you can dislodge Trump's deep instinct with some piece of information, I just don't know. I mean, we'll see.
Thank you. My name is Sasha. I'm working for Economic Security Council of Ukraine, and we investigate how Russia gets Western technologies, some materials, and even despite sanctions for their military plans. And we know that sanctions, it's always a race if alias quick enough to do new sanctions, or if Russia quick enough to find new loopholes. And as we see now, let's be honest, losing course. US don't create new sanctions and maybe control less previous one. And my question is, if EU understand that maybe they should be this new sanction lead in the world. Of course, if not the EU, then whom? And if sanctions will lose this, maybe even all democracies will lose and evil axis will win.
So I think the EU, at least that part of the EU that we've just been discussing, the sort of 4 big states plus Scandinavia and the Balts, I think they do understand it. And there was a new set of EU sanctions in the last few days, and there is a very hot, very ongoing discussion about what to do with this Russian frozen money. And I don't know, I can't tell you what will happen. I've heard 9 different versions of what will happen, but there are certainly people are preparing for the possibility of the lifting of US sanctions. But you're right, I mean, this would be a very difficult moment. If the US were to lift sanctions and Europe did not, then this would immediately create some kind of new tension, I think. I have not heard Trump speak about sanctions. I don't know what he thinks.
Here's the question. Yeah.
Hi. Thank you both for the conversation. My name is Salvador. I'm a researcher at the University Institute in Florence, Italy. And my question is about the European Union. As we all know, the European Union was founded in the West by France, West Germany, Italy, the Benelux countries. And since the war started, I think we're seeing a shift to the East. We have Kaja Kallas in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Brussels, Donald Tusk sitting with the big 3. Lately, as you mentioned, an increase in protagonism by the Baltics, by Poland, by Finland. Do you think this can bring long-term transformations in the European institutions from the West to the East? And what kind of resistance or backlash can we expect from Western European political parties? Thank you.
Well, so first of all, these are countries that joined the EU many, many years ago. And so the fact that there is now an EU commissioner from Eastern Europe, the so-called new countries, new members, although it's not very new anymore, seems to me not remarkable, and also not necessarily it has to be connected to the war. I mean, it's simply, just as there was a moment when Donald Tusk became chairman of the European Council, and now there's a moment when we have a Baltic foreign commissioner, and it's, these are normal members of the EU, and they also should be part of the system. If we're going to have this kind of system where we choose jobs that way, which I have mixed feelings about, then of course they should be in it. So I'm not sure this means any new influence. I mean, clearly there is an interest in so-called Eastern countries that feel, and this includes Finland and Sweden, as well as Eastern Europe. There's clearly an interest in Denmark. There's a greater sense of threat, and there's a feeling that we need a common response. And you are already seeing them acting in this creation of a coalition of the willing, which includes those countries who really care, and they're going to be working together more, partly to avoid a veto from Hungary and partly to avoid this kind of backlash from Southern Europe. And I don't find any of that strange. It seems normal to me, and I'm not sure it means that EU institutions are any different or that there's been any deep change. I mean, maybe there should be a deep change, but I'm not sure that there has been. Might there be a backlash against the war or from Eastern Europe, more Western European political parties? Of course, there is already. So we already have pro-Russian, pro-Putin parties in almost every country. They're winning elections in some places. They might win the next French presidential election, we don't know. They have a big voice in Italy, they have a voice in Spain, they have a voice in Germany, everywhere. And those are, I wouldn't say that those are a reaction against the EU becoming Eastern, but rather the reflection of a huge investment in Russian money and political propaganda, a huge, some real and some manufactured dissatisfaction with the status quo. In the special case of Germany, it's about ongoing resentments of Eastern Germany against the western part of the country. I mean, when you start to unpack what's the source of this, you find it is connected with local politics, local dissatisfaction, and not so much with structures of the EU or whether Kaja Kallas is the foreign minister of the EU. That's how I would answer that.
Last question. Here.
Hello, thank you for your support for Ukraine. My name is Suliana. I work for ABC News here, and my question would be, now we have a war here in Ukraine, there is still a war in the Middle East, and how likely do you think there is even bigger war coming? Thank you.
I hope not. I mean, I don't know.
Are you afraid of that? Do you have this
No,
fear?
I don't wake up every morning worrying about the next war. I'm interested in the wars that we have. And by the way, there's the largest war that has produced the most refugees is in the world right now is the war in Sudan. And so if you feel that your war is forgotten, I invite you to look at that one.
Thank you so much. Please thank
you.
Applebaum.